All right. Hello, everyone. Please come here and join us for the demo of Model Designer. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I think to understand the value of what we are launching, it's important to understand some of the things that we have learned about the on-premise cloud industry as we've evolved our product over time. And I'm sure a lot of the folks here know Mirantis and know our products, but as a quick recap, the very first thing that we launched at Mirantis was Mirantis OpenStack distribution. And one of the biggest differentiators of that distribution was the installer that we coupled it with, which was called Fuel. Fuel was a very GUI-rich installer for OpenStack. And to some extent, because of that, it became arguably one of the most popular ways to get started with OpenStack, because you literally come to a website, you download one ISO, you bring up a very pretty screen with a bunch of buttons that you can click next, 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 select very few settings, and you have your cluster. So what we've learned, though, is that while that was a great way for people to get started, it wasn't the best way for people to actually scale or do day two operations, largely because this GUI concept and kind of GUI-driven installation forces a fair amount of an opinion into the architecture, which you can't work around. So we've ended up with a situation where we had a lot of people download our product, install, get started at small scale, and then they would come to us and they'd say, OK, well, I want to now connect some sort of enterprise storage, or I want to change the networking, or I want to do controller HA in a slightly different way, simply because we have kind of different approach and different policies, and none of that you could do with Fuel. So we've ended up basically having to oftentimes kind of hack around the existing installs that the customers have done themselves. And about 2 years ago, we figured that this is non-sustainable and we have to re-engineer our product, re-architect it to enable people to actually get more flexibility without necessarily jeopardizing predictability and stability. So what we did is we completely changed the model and basically embraced the kind of a CI/CD-driven deployment model for OpenStack. And the way it works, and this is how MCP actually works today, is you define a cluster using a hierarchy of YAML files. And it's a whole bunch of YAML files, and it's a complicated hierarchy. But the good thing is that it's completely GitOps-driven, and you can change virtually every single thing, every single setting about the cluster. And also, the process for doing any kind of day two operation is very much similar to how you would do the deployment. So you build the model, you push the model out to the tool called drivetrain, and then the drivetrain goes ahead and performs some sort of operation on your on-premise cluster, be it OpenStack or Kubernetes or whatever other components are there. Now, the problem with this approach is the crazy voodoo magic scripts right there. There's a lot of people that are really big fans of GitOps and screwing around with YAML files, but unfortunately, the barrier to entry and barrier to getting started is pretty tall. So today, as our product stands, it's really hard to even deploy a small kind of a basic footprint unless you are into GitOps and you understand how the reclass inheritance model works and how to edit the YAML files. So what we're introducing now is what we call Infra-as-Code for normal people and not DevOps ninjas. And I will demo it in a second, but in a nutshell, what it is a SaaS-driven GUI that provides guardrails and some opinion on top of the YAML model which you would use to deploy the cluster. So you still get the YAML model, and you can still tweak the actual YAML files and get the granularity. But if you want to get started easy, you can actually go to a SaaS interface that has very few fields, and where you can change the degree of, I guess, flexibility and extensibility that you want to deal with, and get a Fuel-like experience for at least getting started. So the general flow now for how you would deploy MCP, or really how you perform any update or any operation in MCP, looks something as follows. So you would download binaries, which are actually like open source binaries that we've packaged and we've security tested, as an ISO image. A single image that contains everything in it. It's OpenStack, all of the OpenStack services. There is OpenContrail there, Ceph, and Kubernetes. But the binaries are blank. There is no configuration. So they need to be you need to apply the configuration to them and do the deployment or do any kind of operation. Then you would go into the SaaS portal, which is a model designer, which I'll show you. And you can choose how deep you want to go in terms of degree of configurability and flexibility that you want to basically go through next, and then you will generate what we call a configuration drive. Configuration drive is literally a file, like a 20 meg file, that model designer can commit to a Git repo, or it can send you an email that then later, through a single CLI command, you will combine with the binaries, and you will get your drivetrain instance up and running with all of the pipelines pre-populated to actually do the deployment or do the update using the configuration settings that you have described in the model designer. So I won't have time to demo the entire flow, but I wanted to show you some of the key things that will give you a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. So first of all, let me show you a little bit what the old version of doing an MCP deployment looks like, just to give you an idea. So you'd have to literally build a model using a reclass inheritance structure, which consists of a whole bunch of YAML files. And for every component that you would install, you would have configuration stored in YAML. So you would go to, like a number of these files, and you would go and you actually commit changes here. And as you commit change, that would trigger a pipeline. So you can see that this is exactly not for a person that's trying to just get started with something. And more importantly, if you go to kind of a traditional enterprise setting or to a typical telco customer, when you show it to a person that has experience doing any kind of operations of something like VMware, when they see this, they're like, oh my God, what is this? How is this going to work? So the model designer kind of makes things a bit simpler. So we can log in. And as I log in, I can see here the history of all the models that I have built in the past, and I can create a new model. Here, you can also download the actual binaries. So these are like the raw binaries that you would download. The download is about 2 gigs. There's a lot of stuff in it, but you really only have to do it once. And then you can create multiple models and reapply them to these binaries. We also have this getting started guide that people can read through and understand what to do. But let's go ahead and try and generate some model. So first, over here, and this is kind of important because this paradigm is not exclusively applicable to just OpenStack infrastructure. It's just as applicable to any component that you would be running on premise. So if it's Ceph, or if it's a OpenContrail network, or if it's a Kubernetes cluster that you want to run on premise in conjunction with Ironic bare metal, you can technically use the same flow. So here we have just 2 options, but the idea is that we can expand the default settings for the different cluster configurations. Right now we have a default, which is our standard kind of a OpenStack cluster configuration for about 50 nodes, but then we have this all-in-one OpenStack, which is the simple configuration, which is what people typically try to deploy on a VM if they just want to get Horizon up. So now that I've selected my template, I can go ahead and start tweaking some of the fields. So one of the important kind of killer features that we've introduced here is the ability to change the difficulty level, which you basically feel comfortable operating at. So I'm too young to die difficulty level here. You basically, in the all-in-one model, you can change practically nothing. So you can change cluster name. I'll change it, I don't know, demo123. You can change the domain and very few things. Now, if I go to Hurt Me Plenty, for instance, I get more fields exposed, and I'm offered options to actually deploy additional OpenStack services, connected to Gainsight, and a whole bunch of other things. So also, you have this useful kind of a tooltip that, unlike in configuring raw YAML, you can actually have an explanation of like what the hell is this field, right? So let's go next. And the important thing is that you actually, this structure, it mimics the inheritance model of reclass. And you select certain fields in the beginning, and you specify kind of a general settings. And then based on the general settings that you've specified, the fields that you will be editing in the second stage, they will change. So here, we didn't select any special OpenStack services to deploy, so you basically don't have a lot of options to choose from. But anyway, let me go through it and show you some stuff what happens on the back end. So before we start generation, you can also see actually some of the key fields that we have changed in the YAML hierarchy, and you can go over them. But let's go ahead and start maybe and generate the model. So now this model is generating. So what does that mean exactly? When the model is generating, we're actually doing on the back end a validation of the settings. So there's literally like a salt master being brought up. And based on the settings that you have specified in the model, it will try to go ahead and validate and build the model that you've constructed. So validation already happens for you on the back end. Again, because we kind of practice a loose coupling between the model and the binaries. It's not 100% fail-safe, so there's still possibilities that you've gotten the model, but you actually changed some settings on your on-premise environment between what you specified and what we validated against, and it might not deploy, but you at least will get a working model. So behind the scenes, basically what it is just, it's a Jenkins pipeline that does the model build and model validation. So if we switch to the cool blue ocean view, you can see right here, this stage right here, the test stage, is the stage that takes the longest to actually complete. It takes about 7 minutes. But once that's completed, it will progress for the rest of the stages, and I will literally get the model in the email that I can go ahead and combine with the binaries and do the deployment. And once I've done the deployment, I'll basically get a drivetrain interface with a whole bunch of options to deploy, and you can deploy OpenStack or you can deploy other things. So let me switch to this. So why are we doing this, and what is the point of this? What is the benefit? So first of all, like I said, you have a decoupling, complete decoupling between the configuration and the binaries. The binaries are all open source Apache 2 that we've packaged. You can download them, you can keep them, you can use them, you can reuse them. You only have to download one time unless we've actually changed something to the packages, at which point you will get a notification inside the SaaS portal. The SaaS model enables us to very granularly actually control the guardrails within which we kind of help you define the model, because there is probably to the tune of 60 different open source components inside MCP. So the bigger ones, of course, like OpenStack and Ceph and OpenContrail, but there's a whole bunch of other smaller things that operate on their own release cycles, and there's constantly some new features or tweaks or things like that. And with GUI that is SaaS-driven, we can actually very dynamically change the settings that may or may not be relevant for you to actually generate the configuration drive. Moreover, going through the GUI, you can see which settings you can tweak that will fall within the support SLA that we can provide, and which settings will fall outside. And we can actually demonstrate that right there so that you have the right expectations. And finally, with this model, you can actually go ahead and deploy things completely offline. So if you're like a regulated enterprise or a telco, oftentimes there is a problem with letting us drill a VPN into your infrastructure. With this, we don't need really any physical access for providing this kind of loosely coupled control over what you're deploying. You have the model, you have the binaries, you combine them, and you go. And we validate the configuration, but you do the deployment and you own the environment. So this is available in limited beta right now, but we're pretty liberal in terms of letting people in and helping us kind of evolve this. We're going to release it to general public at the end of May, and we would very much appreciate your guys' support to subscribe to the beta. You can go to mirantis.com/md-beta, subscribe. We'll give you an account. We'll have a team specifically working with you and kind of getting feedback from you on any problems that you got generating the models or things like that. So that's all I had. And if we have any time for questions, I can answer a few over here. Thank you.